Welcome to the wreckage of the original lineup, where the music was disco, the drummer was a hired gun, and the deception changed the band forever. By 1979, the face of Peter Criss was everywhere, on lunchboxes, on solo albums, and plastered across the cover of Dynasty. But the hands holding the sticks in the studio belonged to someone else. Today, on Chapter 6 of Dynasty Deception, we dissect the quiet erasure of the Catman and the rise of the Fox. This isn't just a story about a band replacing a musician. It is the story of a man who was surgically removed from the empire he helped build, and the stove repairman from Brooklyn who walked into the fire to save a band that was rotting from the inside out. To understand why the Dynasty sessions became a crime scene of authenticity, we have to set the stage. The year is 1979. KISS is not just a band. They are a walking, breathing corporation. They are coming off the massive marketing blitz of the 1978 solo albums and the NBC movie KISS Meets The Phantom of the Park. Financially, they are titans. They are superheroes to millions of children. But internally, they are disintegrating. The 4 solo albums were supposed to give the members breathing room to prevent a breakup. Instead, they just highlighted how far apart they had drifted. And in the centre of this collapse was the drum throne. Today, we are going to pull back the curtain on the business of replacement. We will look at the ghost drumming of Anton Fig, the brutal, unvarnished truth of Peter Criss's firing, and the arrival of Eric Carr. Eric Carr wasn't a rock star when he joined. He was a guy fixing ovens in New York who gave KISS a second life, only to meet a tragic end that mirrors the band's turbulent history. This is the story of how the cat lost his 9 lives and how the fox earned his stripes in a war he didn't start, but one he finished. When you listen to Dynasty, released on May 23, 1979, you are hearing a lie. The album credits Peter Criss on drums. The marketing pushed the image of the 4 original members united, 4 musketeers taking on the world. But the audio tells a different, colder story. By the time the band entered the studio, Peter Criss was, for all intents and purposes, a liability to the machine. Producer Vinnie Poncia was brought in to polish the band's sound for a pop disco market. He took one look at Peter and made a calculated decision. He determined that Peter's state, ravaged by substance abuse and a severe hand injury from a 1978 car accident, was substandard. The groove that had defined the raw, garage rock sound of early KISS was gone, replaced by erratic timing and a lack of physical stamina. Enter Anton Fig. Known as the Thunder from Down Under, Fig had played on Ace Frehley's 1978 solo album, the only solo record that garnered genuine critical acclaim. Poncia and the band leadership, Simmons and Stanley, quietly brought Fig into the fold. He played on every single track of Dynasty, except for one. Dirty Livin'. Think about the psychological weight of that. You are a founding member of the biggest band in the world, and you are being erased from your own record, allowed only a token appearance on the song you wrote and sang. This wasn't just a creative choice, it was a sterilization. The band needed perfection to compete with the slick production of the late 70s, and Peter Criss was perfectly imperfect. This deception didn't stop there. It carried over into 1980's Unmasked. By this point, the charade was absolute. Anton Fig played every drum track on the album, yet Peter appeared in the music video for Shandy, released in June 1980, waving goodbye to the fans who had no idea he hadn't played a note. The Dynasty deception wasn't just about selling an album, it was about maintaining the integrity of the brand, while the human element was falling apart. The studio erasure was one thing that could be hidden behind mixing boards and non-disclosure agreements. But the live environment is where the truth becomes undeniable. The 1979 Dynasty tour was a disaster of morale. Peter, knowing his days were numbered and feeling the sting of betrayal, began to rebel in the only way he had left: sabotage. The tension culminated in what is now infamous in KISS lore: the Toledo show, December 16, 1979. This was the last time the original four members would ever play a full concert together until the reunion decades later. This wasn't just a bad gig, it was a mutiny. According to backstage accounts and band biographies, Peter intentionally slowed down the tempos. He dragged the songs, forcing Gene and Paul to look like fools as they tried to maintain their high-energy stage antics against a lethargic, dying beat. That show was the nail in the coffin. The corporation could tolerate drug use, they could tolerate ego clashes, but they could not tolerate the sabotage of the live product. The decision was made. Although the exact date of the firing is often debated, the official departure was formalized on May 18, 1980. In true KISS fashion, the exit was managed like a press release. They cited creative differences and a desire for a solo career. Peter released his solo album Out of Control in September 1980, but without the KISS machine behind it, it failed to make a dent. The payout was the final insult and the final golden handshake. Peter was bought out of his partnership. The original quartet, the four faces that had defined a generation of rock merchandise, were officially broken. The Catman was gone, leaving a void that seemed impossible to fill. How do you replace a character? How do you replace a face that is tattooed on thousands of fans? You don't. You find someone who is hungry enough to wear a new one. The year is 1980. KISS is holding auditions. They are looking for a miracle. They need someone who can play with technical precision, someone who can sing, and someone who is willing to step into the shadow of a legend and disappear behind a mask. Enter Paul Caravello. He wasn't a rock star. He was a stove repairman from Brooklyn. He was 30 years old, arguably too old for a big break in an industry obsessed with youth. He had spent years grinding in cover bands, playing weddings and clubs, watching the dreams slip away. He was a guy who fixed appliances during the day and played drums at night, living a double life of aspiration and reality. His audition story is the stuff of fairy tale, but painted in the gritty colours of New York City. He didn't have an agent. He didn't have connections. He sent a bright orange envelope to KISS management, something that would pop out of the pile of white resumes. It was a desperate, brilliant move. In the audition room, he didn't try to be Peter Criss. He didn't try to be a rock god. He was humble. He famously asked the band for an autograph after the audition, assuming he wouldn't get the gig, and just wanting a souvenir to show his friends in Brooklyn. This humility was exactly what Simmons and Stanley needed. They didn't want another ego. They wanted a partner who was grateful to be there. But more importantly, they heard something in his playing that Peter never had. They heard power. They heard a heavy metal engine waiting to be unleashed. Paul Caravello got the job, but Paul Caravello couldn't be in KISS. He had to become a creature. The process of creating his persona highlights the identity crisis the band was facing. Originally, they toyed with the idea of the Hawk. There are photos of Eric in this prototype makeup. It's awkward, angular, and frankly, ridiculous. It didn't fit his face or the band's aesthetic. It was Paul himself who found the connection to the Fox. He realized he was the sly, cunning survivor. The makeup was refined, focusing on sharp lines and a bandit-like appearance. It was distinct from the cat, yet fit within the animalistic lore of the band. He officially became Eric Carr. His debut at the Palladium in New York City on July 25, 1980, was a trial by fire. Imagine the pressure. You are replacing a founding member in your hometown. The fans are skeptical. The critics are sharpening their knives. But when the curtain fell, the energy shifted. Eric Carr didn't just play the songs, he attacked them. He brought a double bass fury that Peter Criss never utilised. He was faster, harder and louder. The visual of Eric Carr behind the kit, a mountain of hair and makeup, thrashing with a physicality that bordered on violence, signalled a new era. The disco influence of Dynasty was dead. KISS was becoming a heavy metal band. To truly understand Eric Carr's impact, we have to look at the sonic shift. Peter Criss was a jazz-influenced drummer. He swung. He had a rolling R and B feel that gave early KISS its boogie-woogie swagger. Eric Carr was a tank. The 1982 album Creatures of the Night, released in October, is the definitive document of this change. Listen to the snare drum on the title track. It sounds like a cannon shot in a cathedral. That sound, massive, reverberated, aggressive, became the signature of 80s hard rock, and Eric Carr was at the forefront of it. On tracks like War Machine and I Love It Loud, Eric isn't just keeping time, he is driving the composition. He allowed Gene and Paul to write heavier riffs because they knew the drummer could support the weight. Peter's style would have collapsed under the heaviness of Creatures of the Night. Eric's style elevated it. He modernized KISS. Without Eric Carr, it is highly probable that KISS would not have survived the transition into the 1980s. The musical landscape was shifting toward Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, and Metallica. A jazz swing drummer wouldn't cut it. They needed a heavy hitter. Eric Carr gave them the credibility to stand on stage with the new wave of metal bands and not look like dinosaurs. But Eric Carr was more than just a heavy foot and a loud snare. He was the heart of the band during its most cynical era. Fans loved him not just because he was good, but because he was nice. He answered fan mail personally. He stopped for photos. He was the approachable member of the corporation, the guy who never forgot he used to fix stoves for a living. However, the internal rot of the band eventually caught up to him too. By the early 90s, tensions were rising, but nothing could prepare the band or the fans for the diagnosis. Heart cancer? A rare, aggressive form of cancer usually found in the lining of the heart. The tragedy of Eric Carr is encapsulated in his final performance, the video for God Gave Rock and Roll to U2. Eric was dying. He had undergone multiple open-heart surgeries. He had lost his hair from chemotherapy, but he refused to let a replacement sit in his seat for the video. He flew to Los Angeles, donned a wig to hide the effects of his treatment, and played the drums with every ounce of strength he had left. He died on November 24, 1991. In a cruel twist of fate, this was the same day Freddie Mercury passed away. Because of Freddie's massive global fame, Eric's death was largely overshadowed in the mainstream media. It was a final, quiet exit for the man who had spent his career in the shadow of the Catman, but who had given everything to keep the band alive. Eric Carr's tenure from 1980 to 1991 reframed the entire history of the band. It showed us that Peter was the soul of the 70s, the loose, dangerous groove of the street. But Eric was the engine of survival. He proved that KISS could exist and thrive without the original four. He wasn't just a replacement, he was a savior. He walked into a crime scene of authenticity and brought something real: talent, humility, and thunder. The deception of Dynasty opened the door, but Eric Carr built the house that sustained KISS for a decade. Next time, we dive into the fallout of Ace Frehley's departure and the end of the makeup era. Subscribe to Next Wave Vision 92 and hit the bell. You don't want to miss the next chapter of The Deception.